Well, welcome back to our YouTube channel, Soaring Together. In today's video, we're going to take you back to the heavy-duty truck rally that we attended last week. And, you know, one of the main emphasis at the rally is safety. And we were asked to film the entire presentation by Mike Parker on the air brake systems. So today we want to share that with you per his permission to do so. So we hope that you enjoy this. And if you haven't attended one of the rallies, you'll want to watch this video in the entirety to get all the good information that he gives us. So let's go right now to the presentation.
I'd like to thank Mike for taking his time out and coming.
Yes.
And I think if you've never sat through this before, you're in for an eye-opener.
How many new people do I have here this year? Oh, a lot. Okay. Well, welcome. I'm glad to be back. A little bit about me is I have been doing the instruction portion of this for about 12 years now. Prior to that, I actually worked out into the field and fixed this stuff for a living. I like to come out and talk to you guys about air brakes because they're a little bit different animal than what you're used to on your car or your pickup. And there's some things that we kind of need to watch for. I'll try to give you what I think are the important things. And probably the most important part of this whole presentation is if you have a question, shoot your hand up. Right? There is no question I won't at least try to answer. I may not be able to answer them all, but I'll try. If you own a Volvo, I'm going to pick on you a whole lot. Sorry about that. I'm a Kenworth guy. But, you know, that's just kind of the way it is. So, this board setup here, and this is a new board for us this year. It's something a little different than we've had before. This is a typical air system that's in the chassis that you own right now. I don't care what brand it is. It's pretty much going to be the same system. So this smaller board represents everything that's inside your cab. And then the larger board out here is everything under the hood and in the chassis. Okay? And we usually put it up on stage, but this thing's awful heavy and I didn't want to try to lift it up there. So, I have a couple of different styles of air dryers. We'll talk about air dryers here in a little bit. That's the thing that spews air out when you build up to 120, 130 pounds, wherever your governor's set at. But I have a couple different styles of them that we'll talk about. Talk a little bit about maintenance on them. So why air? You know, I get that question a lot. Why not hydraulic brakes just like you have on a car or a pickup? The biggest reason for that is with air going down the road, especially in a tractor trailer setup, if we have a small leak, the compressor will usually keep up with that, right? So we can keep going down the road. If we have a small leak in a hydraulic brake system, it's not going to be long and you're going to push the pedal and it's going to go to the floor and you're going to be going, oh crap, where's the nearest runaway lane? So that's one of the reasons for air. The other reason, especially if we're doing tractor trailer, is the connections to the trailer. You always lose a little bit of fluid when you make a connection. With air, we don't care, right? Because we're constantly building air. That's the other nice thing about the air system, is it's an unlimited source for us. As soon as we use a little bit, we just build it back into the system. So we have an air compressor that sits on the engine. These air compressors are direct drive to the engine today. They used to be a belt drive. There may be a few of those still out there, but most of them are geared directly to the gear train of the engine. So if the engine's running, the air compressor is at least turning. Now it's not always compressing air, but it's always turning. There's a set of valves in there that once we reach whatever our governor cutout pressure is, that 120, 130 pounds, it holds open the intake valve. So the compressor is still spinning, it's just not building air. As soon as the air drops a little bit, those valves close, builds the air back up in the system. It's actually mandated by the government how the difference between what we call cut in and cut out pressure. So cut out pressure is when your air dryer spits, and that's to eliminate the moisture out of the system, because that's the one thing that's really, really bad on an air system is moisture. Right? You have all this stuff that's hanging out somewhere under the chassis, and if you're driving in Alaska in the wintertime, it's going to get cold. And if we have moisture in the system, that's going to cause us a lot of problems. We'll get ice in the lines, ice in the valves, and that's a real big issue. So the air dryer spits to evacuate the moisture out of our system. Again, when that can be adjusted a little bit. You all will have an air governor similar to this somewhere on your air system. I say somewhere. Most of the time they're mounted directly to the compressor. Sometimes they're mounted on the dryer. Kenworth, in one of their brilliant moves, mounted them under the passenger step. I don't really know where that came from, but they did. It's adjustable out here on the end. If you screw this little screw out, you'll gain air pressure. If you screw it in, you'll lower the pressure where your compressor cuts out. Whatever that is, if it's 130 pounds, somewhere between 110 and 105 pounds, your compressor is going to kick back on. It's mandated by the government that 20 to 25 psi below cutout pressure, you have cut-in pressure. So that's not adjustable. Okay, it's just going to happen. This particular board, the air dryer or the governor, is up here. On some of the newer trucks now, you'll have an air dryer that looks like this. Okay, if you have an air dryer that looks like this, the governor is mounted right on the dryer. If it has a blue cap like this, it is a non-adjustable governor. Okay, the adjustable governors will have a black cap similar to this. You just screw this cap off, maybe. I hope this board works, by the way. It's the first time I've used it, so we'll see. But you just screw this cap off, and then here's your adjusting screw right underneath. There's a screw and then a jam nut so that you can set it where you want it and it'll stay. So the air comes in to the air dryer, fills up the air dryer. When you reach that cutout pressure, there's a little signal line. This little guy right here that comes from the governor down to the dryer that activates the purge valve, we call it. And when it purges, then it evacuates the moisture. You'll see, I hope you can see, there's a little white plug down here. That's actually a heater. Now, that doesn't heat the whole air dryer or the whole air system, but it heats up that purge valve so that when it does evacuate the moisture, any moisture that remains won't freeze. So if this thing quits and it's got ice hanging off of it, you've probably got a bad heater. Pretty easy to change. Just pop it out, pop a new one in, not much to it. Not a common failure, but it does happen. Okay. So we'll just go over some of the controls. Whether you have a trailer or not, your truck probably has, we call it the Johnny bar. It's a little trailer brake bar. All this thing does is activate trailer brakes. Has nothing to do with any of the brakes on the truck chassis itself. We have our foot valve down here. They can actually be mounted in the floor or in the dash, depending on the model of truck. This is just a junction box to distribute air where it needs to go. This is called the MV3 valve. This is your tractor trailer park valve. Of course, we talked about the air dryer. These right here, and you can see there's one that goes to each front. These are the front brakes, by the way. Goes to each front brake. These are the ABS valves. On the rear back here, the ABS valves are actually built into this relay valve, which distributes the air. and I'll kind of explain that here in a minute. We have a couple quick release valves that helps release the brakes faster, so your brakes aren't hanging on. We have the governor, your air tanks. You know, that's kind of about it. This is called the tractor protection valve. It's where your trailer hoses are hooked up to. How many of you have older trucks?
What's older?
Mid-90s and older. Okay, you may have what's called a bobtail proportion valve. If you do, there'll be a sticker on the dash somewhere that says something to the effect, brakes may not be as effective without the trailer hooked up. That's not the exact wording, but it'll be something similar to that. And I'll talk a little bit later about how we can get around that. So when you push in the yellow valve, what it does is it puts air to what we call the spring brakes or the park brake. So I have a cutaway here of what that thing looks like inside. There's a big spring back here, a diaphragm for the park side, a diaphragm for the service side, or when you push your foot on the pedal, and then there's a little return spring in here. This spring back here, I affectionately refer to in my class as the spring of death. So this spring is coiled up inside there about like that. If anybody wants to try to compress this thing, you're more than welcome to. I can't remember, 10, 11,000 pounds of push on this thing. So we have, the air compresses this. When we push the yellow valve in, the air compresses it. The slack adjusters back there should move when I do this. See how it pulls the slack adjusters back in? So that then releases your park brakes. Anytime that knob comes out, it sets the brakes. Sorry if I made you jump. It sets the brakes. So if we run out of air, we're going to stop. This is a true emergency brake. Emergency brakes in a car, you have to do something with them, right? You got to grab a handle, you got to step on a pedal, you got to do something. And I'm just going to say, and you have to excuse my language here, but when you're in a panic situation or an emergency situation, the only thing that you're thinking is, oh shit, oh shit. You're not thinking I need to grab a handle or step on a pedal, right? If you're in a situation where you're going to run out of air, this thing is going to stop, okay? It's kind of like pulling that little pin out of your trailer brake. It's going to come on. So that's a good thing. The red valve charges the trailer line. If you're not using trailer air, you'll never push that in. Now, getting back to that whole bobtail proportioning valve. If you have trailer hoses and you want to get around that thing, you can simply dummy off the hose. Now, I should be able to press my red valve in and nothing will happen. So all we did was we charged this red line with air. This tractor protection valve now knows there's air there. So the problem you have when you do that is if I step on the brake pedal, let's let that fall. If I step on the brake pedal now, air comes out that blue hose. So what you have to do then is dummy off both hoses. So, maybe. Now all that did for me is I can push on my brake pedal now and no air comes out that hose. Okay? That enables the chassis to think you have a trailer on. What happens with the bobtail proportioning valve, since you don't have any weight over the fifth wheel, it limits the amount of braking you get to your rear axles. Okay? Once we do this, you get full braking to your rear axles again.
Are those only on older trucks?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying 90s and older?
Probably 95 and older, somewhere in that neighborhood, 95, 96, somewhere in there and older. They found that was a big problem, right? With the advent of anti-lock brakes, and as good as anti-lock brakes work now, we don't have that issue if we don't have any weight back there. If that tire goes to skid, then it just releases the anti-lock brake, just releases the air off of that brake chamber. Okay. What else? Each one of these tanks is independent of itself. That's why this doesn't work the way it should. I'm missing a check valve. There's a check valve, should be at each one of these tanks, that's a one-way check valve, so that once the air goes in, it can't come back out. The reason for that is, what if we're going down the road and something flies up and knocks a hole in one of our tanks? Right? We don't want to lose air out of the whole system. So each tank, once it's filled, it has, like I say, a one-way check valve. That air can't bleed backwards into another tank. So we'll just go over these real quick. We have a supply tank. The supply tank's job is to do nothing but supply air to the other two tanks. Notice we have 3 tanks but only 2 gauges, right? We just have a primary and secondary air pressure gauge. We don't really care how much air is in this tank because its job is just to move the air somewhere else. We have the primary tank, and the only job of the primary tank is the rear tractor brakes. Okay, that's all it does. Supplies air to the rear tractor brakes. The secondary tank supplies air to everything else. Steer axle brakes, your air seat, if you have an air fan. I'm so old, I remember when we had air windows instead of electric windows. So anything else that's powered by air comes from the secondary tank. So you could lose all the air pressure in your secondary tank and you would still have rear tractor brakes. Because of the way this foot valve is designed, it's actually a 2-stage valve. You have primary in the front part of the valve, secondary in the back part of the valve. It's a redundant system, so if we lose all the air out of either one of those tanks, all your brakes are going to work. Because of the porting inside this valve, it's going to move air where it needs to so that all your brakes still function. Okay? Any of you guys ever have a anti-lock brake light come on in the dash? ABS light come on? So what that means is you have an ABS fault somewhere, right? We don't necessarily know where from the light on the dash, but we know there's a failure somewhere in the ABS system. That does not mean that your ABS is going to quit working. I should say in most cases, it does not mean that. If it's a wheel sensor failure, if it's one of these valve failures, all it's going to affect is that one location, right? So if it were this front steer axle valve that was bad, the only thing that wouldn't have anti-lock brakes would be this one front wheel. Everything else, the ABS would still work. Okay. What else have we got? That's most of what's on the boards. Okay, I'm done. I can go now. Talk about a couple of different things. The diaphragms. The diaphragms inside of these brake chambers are the weak spot. As you can see, this one doesn't hold air anymore. So if you press on your brake pedal and you have air coming out, if you want to come up and look later, but there's a hole up here in the top of this, and there's also a hole down in the bottom of that. That's to let moisture out so it doesn't rust this can up. If you have air bleeding out of those holes when you step on your brakes, you have a bad diaphragm. Okay? It's replaceable. It's about 12 bucks. It's not too hard to replace. You take this band off right here, pop it out, stick a new one in, away you go down the road again. Well, we'll talk about the spring. Okay. Yeah, the spring is actually on the other side, so it can't come out. If you look at this, this is a really old brake chamber, and you can see it has bolts on both bands. They quit building them this way because too many people were taking the wrong end off. I've actually witnessed that. I wasn't the guy doing it, but I witnessed it. It shot the back half of this can, probably from here to that wall and then through the wall. They come off with quite a lot of force. But what they've done now, so that you don't do that, if you look at this band here, there's no bolts in it. It's a crimped on band, so you can't take it out. I'm sure some guy's gonna get a cut off wheel out there and cut the damn thing off, but you shouldn't be able to take that off. Now, if you have no air pressure though, that spring is still gonna be trying to push that brake, right? So what do you do in that case? Well, this is called a cage bolt. Okay, every brake chamber that has a spring brake has a cage bolt, and it's located right back here. They put a handy dandy little, oh, I can't get it out because the gauges are there. They put a handy dandy little bolt right here, a little carrier, so you can take that thing out. If you have to cage those brakes, notice there's a little T up here on the end. That just goes in there. You got to kind of play around till you find the slot. I'm going to be able to find it today. There it is. You put it in the slot and you turn it, and it locks it in. And then as you tighten this bolt, I'm not going to do it very tight because it's pretty tough with little short crescent wrench like this. But as I tighten this bolt, eventually the slack adjuster is going to move in. Okay? You're manually compressing the spring is what you're doing. However, you have to be a little bit careful about this because when you manually compress that spring, guess what you don't have anymore? Brakes. You don't have any parking brakes. You'll still have service brakes, but you won't have any parking brakes. So if you're on a hill, that's bad news, right? Everybody carries wheel chocks, right? Okay.
Wheel chocks.
One of the other things I get a lot, as far as brake adjustment, how do we know whether our brakes are adjusted? Okay. Pop this thing out. Put that one back in. I don't know how that there. Sheet. This is in the relaxed position or the released position. So there's no air on the brake. Typically, this is the size of brake chamber you would have on a semi. It's called a 30-30 brake chamber. There's 30 square inches of service brake, 30 square inches of park brake. And what we measure is the stroke or the distance that this moves when we apply the brakes. This will move quite a ways because we don't have brake shoes on the back. What we're actually doing when we adjust the brakes is we're setting the clearance between the drum and the brake shoe. Okay? So what I do is I'll measure that. This typically takes 2 people. I'll just put a tape measure somewhere. I like to measure to the center of the pin. It's just an easy place to measure. Then when you step on the brakes, it pushes that out. You measure the distance it comes out, subtract the 2, and 2 inches is what you should have. Okay. You should never have to adjust your brakes though. On today's vehicles, mandated 30 years ago, you had to have what they call automatic slack adjusters. These are all automatic that are on here. They automatically set that clearance every time you apply the brakes. If you have one that's way out of adjustment, if you check them and it's way out of adjustment, this thing is probably bad. Okay? Get it to a shop, get it replaced. I say on this, get it to a shop and get it replaced because there is a very specific setup procedure when you put these on so that they adjust properly from there out. Okay? As far as adjusting your brakes, if you want to do it yourself, it's pretty easy. On this style of slack adjuster, you just turn this little nut back here. I will tell you to use a 6-point socket and a fairly long ratchet because this thing's pretty hard to turn, and it sounds like you're ripping it apart when you turn it. Literally sounds like you're tearing the guts out of it. There's a kind of like a sprag clutch inside of it that makes it real hard.
What about disc brakes?
Disc brakes adjust the same way, only you adjust them tight and then there's a rotation back off. And I'm not going to try to tell you what it is because each manufacturer is going to have their own. Well, but I don't know what brakes your Kenworth has. Does it have Bendix? Does it have Meritor? I don't know. But it's pretty easy to find a procedure. Guys, I'm telling you, Google and YouTube for a lot of stuff is pretty good. Just use some common sense, right? There's a lot of pretty crazy stuff out there too. And if you miss me, if I don't come back next year, somewhere I have my own YouTube channel. But it doesn't have brakes on it, has transmissions. So no matter what happens to our air system, as far as if a tank falls clear off, we're still going to have brakes. Okay? It's mandated again by the federal government that you have 12 times as much air as you need. So they take all your brake chambers, they figure out how much air your brake chambers hold, and then they multiply that by 12, and that's how much storage capacity you have to have. Yes, ma'am.
Can you do a walkthrough for troubleshooting leaks?
For troubleshooting what? Leaks? Yep, because they happen all the time. I had to fix one when I got here. The easiest way that I can tell you, now there is an electronic tool, I can't remember what the name of it is, Whisper, yeah. And I've been told they work really well. I'm a soap and water guy. Although I don't use soap, which sounds crazy, go to Walmart and buy bubbles. You know, the bubble wand bubbles? That's the best thing in the world to find air leaks. What happens a lot of times, the air is coming out at such a volume, if you use like Dawn dish soap or something like that, it just blows it away and you can't find the leak. There's no surface tension in the bubbles. But those bubble wand bubbles have a lot, it's pretty thick, and so it has a lot of surface tension. Makes it pretty easy to find the leaks. These type of connections that we have on here are that I just start spraying connectors. Okay, we'll talk in a little bit about what acceptable leaks are. None, but but that's impossible, right? You're always going to have some kind of air leak somewhere. I have yet to park a truck anywhere and come back 2 weeks later and have it have all the air in it. It's kind of a fantasy. It just doesn't happen. But you just spray everything down. So while we're on that, I'm going to leave these sheets up here. Anybody can come up and grab one. I printed 50 of them off. I think there's plenty. Steve, I'll leave the rest with you. Somebody somewhere might want one of these. What this is a brake check or an air check. This is printed off. I took this right off the Department of Transportation's webpage. And so the first thing you're supposed to do is start the engine up and just charge your brake system till the governor cuts out. 120, 130 pounds, whatever your governor is. Pump the brakes down 20 to 25 pounds below that. Make sure the compressor comes back on and builds it back up to your specified pressure. Shut the engine off. Okay? shut the engine off, turn the key on, but don't start the engine, and just watch, right? The acceptable leak is 3 pounds in a minute, okay? I have found that it's really hard to count to 60. I'm getting old and I forget where I'm at. So I use a watch. Your phone has a stopwatch on it, but it's 60 seconds, okay? 3 PSI drop in 60 seconds. If it doesn't have that, you're great. Okay, then the next thing that you do is you step on your pedal. This is probably the hardest one to do because you can't fluctuate your foot on the pedal. So they say make a certain pound application. I think a 90-pound application is what they say. I say just jam it to the floor so that you know you're not going to wiggle your foot. Okay? Now, when you do that, you're going to lose some air pressure, right? Because you're filling up all of these brake chambers. Once the air stabilizes, then again, 60 seconds, you're allowed a 4 PSI leak. Okay? Anything more than that is unacceptable. Okay? Now, if you were to have a trailer that ran on air brakes, you would do the same with the trailer brakes next. Same time allowance, make sure you wait for the air to stabilize, all that good stuff. Okay? The reason I say do the tractor and trailer separate is if you do have an air problem, at least you can eliminate one part or the other. Okay? After that, you should pump your brakes. Key on, engine off, pump your brakes till it gets down to 60 PSI or close to that, somewhere between 65 and 57, 58. You should have a low air warning device come on. Now, all trucks have 3 low air warning devices. Okay? You have an audible, which should be a buzzer or something that screams in your ear. You have a visual, which should be a light, and then you have a second visual, and it's these guys right here. Okay, your pressure gauges. Okay, air pressure gets to 60 psi, something should happen. If it doesn't, don't drive the vehicle till it's fixed. You can drive it to the shop, but don't take that thing down the road till it's fixed. And that's just simply a safety thing, right? We want you to know if you're getting low on air. You have a little bit of time that way to find a safe haven, a rest area, off-ramp, something. So you're not sitting in the middle of the highway. Because like I said, when this thing gets so low on air, it's going to stop. It doesn't care if you're in the middle of the road.
What pressure is that?
So the brakes actually, the park brakes actually begin to apply somewhere around 80 PSI. Now you're probably not going to notice it because they're just going to start to move. At 60 PSI you might feel a drag. At 30 PSI it's going to pop this yellow knob out. Right? So it's just going to do this. Oh, maybe I already popped. It's going to do that. And it's going to set the brakes for you. Okay? It's going to make sure you stop and get it fixed. I've never had that happen. I can't imagine. But I would guess it brings you to a halt pretty quick. I've seen the skid marks. Fortunately, I've never had it happen to me. So, if the low air warning device comes on, then you continue to pump the brakes. So on this sheet it says somewhere between 20 and 40 PSI, that knob better come out. Again, if that knob doesn't pop out, that's a safety issue for you guys. Okay? Don't drive the thing down the road. Get it somewhere and get it fixed. If this knob doesn't pop out between 40 and 20 PSI, it's that valve. That's the only thing it can be. Again, they're not horrible to change. You got to take a couple dash panels out, but you better find a way to take good pictures because there's a lot of hoses that go on the back of that thing. I have students all the time. I don't know where this goes. You better figure it out, right? Because you don't want to get anything crossed up back there. That could be a problem. The last thing that you're going to do is you're going to build the air back up. You're going to start the truck and you're going to build the air pressure back up. When it gets to 85 psi, click your stopwatch, okay? Because it needs to, at 1500 RPMs, it needs to build from 85 psi to 100 psi in 45 seconds or less. Okay? 45 seconds or less. If it doesn't, you have a compressor problem, or you could have the plumbing from the compressor to the dryer, or the dryer itself could be plugged. I know that's a lot that could be wrong. But those are the things that could possibly be wrong. Again, if it doesn't build up fast enough, that's a safety issue for you guys. If you get into some kind of an emergency situation and you got to use a lot of air and you can't get it back, you know, that's a problem. So you really want to check that. My suggestion, for a little while I was a fleet manager for a trucking company, and what I told my drivers is, every time you get in the truck, every time you turn the key, I want this done. It only takes about 5 minutes, right? And that 5 minutes could save your life or little Susie in the car in front of you, right? And then the last thing that's on the sheet, which has nothing to do really with brakes, but it's a good idea, do a tug test on your pin, right? Set your trailer brakes, do a tug test. It's just a good practice. Again, I've never had one fall off. I have had to go out and recover multiple semi-trailers that have come unlatched because it just didn't get them hooked up right. Okay. So how do we know what can, let's talk about air dryers real quick again. Again, this is a new modern style air dryer. Pretty typical to what's going to be on everything you buy today. I don't know why they didn't put one of them on this board since it's brand new, but they did. This is just a spin-on cartridge. You just take a filter wrench and spin it off. It doesn't matter whether the tanks are full of air, whether they don't have air. Doesn't matter. Just spin this thing off, spin a new one on. It's that quick. 35, 40 bucks probably. This one that's on the board is a little more difficult. There's a whole row of bolts down here you take off, and then the upper can comes off, and then there's a cartridge down inside with left-handed threads because they just wanted to fool us. First one I did, I sat there for 45 minutes trying to get it loose. Turned it the other way, it spun right off. And then put it back together. A couple of O-rings. Again, not horrible, just a little more inconvenient. My suggestion is that you change that filter once a year whether you need to or not. Okay? The manufacturers of these dryers will tell you they last forever. Right? The last thing you want is to have that thing plug up, freeze up, get full of water. Once that desiccant inside of there absorbs so much water, it can't shed water, or it can't absorb water anymore, so it starts to shed water back into the system. Right? And then there you are in Alaska, somewhere on the Alaskan highway in the middle of, I don't know, it'd be like going through Texas, you know, there's like 900 miles of nothing. And be sitting on the side of the road with your air system froze up. I know maintenance is expensive. I understand that. But maintenance is way cheaper than that $2,500 tow bill. Right? Because I don't know if any of you guys ever had to be towed off the side of the road, but those guys aren't cheap. Right? I think the last I checked, it was, if you had a tractor trailer, it was $8 a mile and a $250 hookup fee. So those guys, but they earn their money. I'm not saying anything bad about the tow truck drivers. They're just expensive. So I would change this once a year. When I was managing the fleet shop, I did it in October. Right before it got cold. That way I was going into winter knowing that my air systems were in good shape. There is always going, yes, I'm sorry.
I know on a Volvo, 07 emissions Volvo, they require a coalescing filter because
So-
they push air to the separate ejector.
So that's on the emission system of the engine though, which would have nothing to do
But
with
they
this.
want a coalescing.
The coalescing filter is actually on the engine. That's part of the crankcase filter. And what it does is it takes the engine vapors and traps it so that the oil goes back into droplets and goes back into the crankcase.
Coalescing air dryer filter.
I've never heard of one. So, anyway, October is a good time to do it, just because you want to go into winter in good shape. There's always moisture in the system because of why?
Moisture in the
Yeah, we're pulling moisture out of the air, right? So if you're along the coast, you're going to get a lot more than if you're in Arizona. You did that for 6 months if you're in Arizona. So depending on your conditions, I guess, I still say once a year is plenty. Maybe if you're in drier climates, you could go 2 years. I don't want to take that chance for a cheap filter, you know. I don't like being on the side of the road stuck anywhere. So that's kind of the maintenance. Really, that's the only maintenance you have on this thing. Okay. We do occasionally have governors fail. This little guy right here. It's about 40 bucks for a brand new one. Don't buy one of these rebuilt, by the way. You can buy remanufactured at any of this stuff. On the air system, it's not that much difference in the cost. I would always buy new, right? Throw this thing in the toolbox of your truck. It's not going to wear out rattling around in there. It's not going to rot or spoil. You may never need it, but boy, if you do, it's awful handy to have. 10-minute change, right? Doesn't take very long. If you're any kind of DIYer, keep one of these in your toolbox. Pay attention when you take it off. Some of the ports may be plugged. You want to plug the same ports that are plugged. Bolt it, it's 2 bolts to take it off. Take the 2 bolts off, the lines off, throw a new one on. They are usually preset pretty close to where you want them. Typically right around 120 pounds. So you don't even have to mess with that. If you get the non-adjustable ones with the blue cap, they're set at about 130 pounds because that's kind of what the new systems require. They purge a lot more air, so they need that extra at the beginning. How do I know if my brake shoes are still good? Look at them, right? Number 1, if there are any cracks in the brake shoes. Obviously, you can't see the face of the brake shoe, right? You can't see this part here because it's inside the drum. What happens is they'll separate along this edge in here. They get moisture and water in there. Excuse me. And you'll see cracks form in here. If they're cracked, they're no good. Put new ones on. There's actually a wear indicator built into every brake shoe so that you know when it's wore out. They make it really easy for you. If you see, and I don't know if you in the back can see this or not, but there's a bevel cut on this edge. It's kind of chamfered. When you can't see that bevel anymore, when it's flat, your brake shoes wore out. I've had a lot of people say, well, I got dust covers on the back of my brakes. I can't see my brake shoes. You didn't hear this from me, but I would tell you to take the 3 bolts out of each one of those dust covers and throw them in the trash. in my opinion. They're holding in heat. If you do off-road stuff a lot, you might want to keep them on, keep the rocks out of your drums. If you're driving on a highway most of the time or paved roads most of the time, to me those dust shields are just a hindrance. You can't see what's going on inside your brakes. I'm a kind of a visual, touchy kind of person, so I like to be able to feel things and make sure nothing's loose and see my brake shoes, that kind of stuff. But that's how you know if they're wore out or not. If it's down to that indicator. What about disc brakes? How do we know when they're wore out? They cut this cute little line in here, okay? And as you can see, that little line doesn't go all the way through. And again, in the back, I apologize if you can't see it. But that line doesn't go all the way through. You can see this if you have the wheel off. You can look down in here and see this brake pad. If you can't see a line in there anymore, it's time to get them changed. Okay? These, anybody can change. There's nothing to it. There's a little strap that goes across, holds a couple springs in there. You pull the strap off. You just pull these shoes right out the top, drop a new set of shoes in there, adjust your brakes up, away you go. Pretty simple. The drum brakes are a little bit tougher to do. We're seeing more and more disc brakes. We're seeing more and more disc brakes because they're just better, right? They stop you better, they last longer, they're just better, right? And the reason that they're better and they stop you faster is when we step on the pedal with disc brakes, there's a pad on each side and it squeezes that rotor, right? Squeezes it together, it just stops you faster. With a drum brake, right, with this brake, when you step on the pedal, this brake actually pivots like this. It's anchored on one end and the other side pivots up. Now, if you look at your brake drum, it's solid on one side and open on the other, right? It will actually flex that brake drum. If you stand on that brake hard enough, it'll actually flex that brake drum. And that's why they don't stop as good as a disc brake. Right? A disc brake is a solid clamp, where a drum brake will actually flex that drum a little bit. And I meant to bring, I've got a piece of brake drum that's about this big, that they actually flexed it so hard it broke a chunk out of the brake drum. It's really hard to inspect your drums on the inside to see what's going on, but it's, you know, when you're looking at stuff, just look around the edges of that drum and make sure you don't have any cracks in there, right? That's when bad things happen. Had a guy come in one time, and the only thing left of his brake drum was that part where the wheel held it on. There was no drum in there at all. That happens sometimes. Again, like I say, how many of you service your own trucks? Anybody? A few of you? Feel all that stuff. Get your hands on it, right? Shake these slack adjusters around. Make sure they're on tight. Make sure you don't have any air hoses rubbing anywhere. Just a good visual and hands-on approach does a lot. Okay, anything I didn't cover yet that you guys would like to know about? Yes, sir.
I'm looking at the panel here where you've got all the shark bites. I realize they're not really shark bites, but we'll call them that. Couple of questions.
Yes.
Shark bites came into being, I don't know what, 10 years ago. So if you have a truck that's 5 or 10 years older, is it going to have this same kind of shark bite system? And number two, are they all going to be nice and neat together on a little array board like that where I can find them and check them so nice and easy?
Man, you live in fantasy land.
No idea.
So these have been around in the trucking industry for a very long time. They've probably been around 20 years. I would love to tell you that they're all nice and neat, and there will be a point somewhere where they come through the cab that they'll be all nice and neat like this. But once we get out of the cab, of course, you know, we're pretty close together with things. You might have a 20-foot run or a 15-foot run where you don't have anything but hose, right? So, but they're going to be everywhere. They're going to be on your air suspension. They're going to be on your brakes.
So if you suspect a leak or you're not gassing or airing up in 45 seconds because it's bleeding off somewhere, you could be anywhere.
But see, you'd already found that, right? Because that's the last thing you do is that air up step. So you did the first step where you just pushed in the yellow knob and you had 20 pounds of leak. Well, there's not very many things connected to that yellow knob, right? Park brake chambers and the valve. So that would be the system you'd look at. Okay. If the next one you do is when you push on the pedal, right? If you lose too much air when you push on the pedal, you got a few more things to look at then, right? Because you got the connections there. You'll have the connections where it come out of the cab, and then all of your brake connections. How about if it's just sitting there losing air? Right? We didn't do anything. We just started up and the damn thing's out of air in the morning. Air springs. Right? If you have air suspension on your vehicle, which almost everybody does today, right? So then you're going to soap the airbags, the leveling valves, and here's the one everybody forgets. How about the cab? Right? You got airbags on the cab. Now, if you shut it off last night at 8 o'clock and you got into the cab 15 times getting crap out to put in the camper, guess what? You're going to be low on air. Because every time you get up on that thing, you do what? You put weight on it, compresses the air spring, you get out of it, now you got too much air in the air spring, so it lets some air out. So every time you do that, you're cycling air out of the system. Okay, so remember that. Now, where's that going to show up? Where, if it's suspension or cab air, secondary gauge, right? If your primary is losing, it's in the tractor service brakes, in the service brake system for the tractor somewhere. The secondary could be, that could be a whole bunch of crap, you know, seats, or some trucks have air-controlled heater valves. So there's too many things to mention. Fan hub is another one. If you have a leaky fan hub, it'll drain your air system pretty fast. Again, though, it's going to be on the secondary side. Yes, sir.
There's a new product out for braking system by Hayes, Aero Electric, and they're, you know, the manual they give you kind of is one picture, and you're supposed to get air, control air out of someplace. And the picture shows the throttle valve, and that's where they tap it. Is there any place that makes sense to, you know, the first?
So is this on a tractor or is this for the trailer?
It's for the trailer, but it's air. It actually looks at the air pressure in the control air pressure. It generates appropriate thing.
So typically where that should be is it should be coming off of this line right here. And so you'd have to push your red knob in to actuate that. Now, unless their system is not making you use the red knob, and they're pulling it right off of your foot valve. Now, I don't know where they pull it off the foot valve. I would have.
That's what they're showing is, you know, put on the foot pedal, and they say, well, go there. You know, some customers ask me, I says, you better not attempt it yourself.
Yeah, so if it's coming off the foot valve, there's a couple of things that you have to have, and you can't see it on this because it's on the back side, but there's actually a check valve back here that's hooked to this trailer valve. So you'd want a check valve in there. I certainly would want a check valve in there. And you'd want it to come off of the secondary side, so the bottom side of that valve. We don't want to touch the top side or the primary side of this valve because that's our main tractor brakes, right? And we don't want to mess with that. If we come off the secondary side, it's not quite as critical. I mean, it is your front brakes, but it's not quite as critical. And that's probably what they're doing, is they're probably pulling it off of the secondary side. Yep. Steve? Yes, sir.
They're hooking some of them right off your flight gauge,
Oh, off your application gauge?
right off the application gauge, off that, for the haze.
Yeah, again, that would not be where I would want it, because that application gauge is pulling the pressure off of your primary. I just wouldn't want anything in my primary system.
Talk to haze is where they say to hook
Is
it
it?
off that application.
Not everybody has an application gauge.
Yeah.
That's an optional gauge. So I would say then probably they're telling you to come down to the treadle valve if you don't have that, would be my guess.
Yeah.
I've not looked into those systems at all, so I'm not sure. Yes, sir.
Best technique for separating the quick fittings.
Best technique, I have a set of tools for it is what I have. And that sounds a little bit crazy maybe, but I'm sure you can get them on Amazon. You can get them from all the major tool vendors. As dumb mechanics, we like to spend lots of money, so we go to the tool truck.
What did he ask?
He asked what the best way to disconnect these valves are. I don't even know if I have drain valve on this thing. I'm gonna drain the air out of this little disconnect valve. I'll try to do it quietly so I don't like hurt everybody's ears. Shouldn't have any come out of there. Yeah, look at that, something actually works. I could actually probably use a little one down here. So if you look at these, again, they're a lot like a shark bite connector. So they have a little collar out here on the outside. I always push the hose in and then push that collar in. This thing rolls, so it makes it kind of a pain. And then they just slide right out. So it is. And the tool is, well, there's a different tool for each side of the hose. They may work fine. I don't know. I haven't ever used. I mean, I have those for air conditioning and stuff. These are a little different, and they're almost bent at a 45-degree angle. It's just kind of like a little U. You just slide it over the hose, and then you can push against the collar pretty easy. The other thing I will say about this, and I have students all the time, and that's why I was draining the air out of the tank. It is possible to unhook those with pressure on them, but it is very, very difficult. So I would drain the system. It makes it really easy. What I do is not falling over. And they just pull apart. Like I say, I push in on the hose just to push the pressure back, hold that collar in. Yeah, now it's not gonna work. Perfect. Anyway, pulls right out. Don't push on one side, push on each. Push evenly across.
If you haven't done one before, they won't come off that easy. Just saying, because they've been on
So-
for probably 5 years. They've got dirt and grit, and you're probably going to have to get hold of the collar and twist the hose, because otherwise they just turn together and it won't come loose.
The other thing is, WD-40, PB Blaster, any of those penetrating oils is a great thing. You can spray it right on the outside of this thing, let it set for a couple minutes, makes it way easier.
Not going to booger up the O-ring.
No, it won't hurt anything. Yep. The only O-rings that will be affected by oil is if they're natural rubber. Okay, so if they're any kind of synthetic rubber, oil won't hurt. Okay. One thing I didn't mention, since we're talking about that, I slid these together pretty easy because this has, if I can get them apart, I have neoprene Lat-An seals on this. If they're rubber seals, and even if you have neoprene seals, you should really lubricate these with something. I don't care, something. I spit on them usually. You know. it just takes something. Otherwise, when you try, they fit really tight, and so when you try to roll them, it'll bunch that thing up, and pretty soon you got a leak. Okay, and leaks we don't want. Still no takers on squeezing this together for me? No. All right, guys, that's my hour. Oh, go ahead.
On the spring brake,
Yes, sir.
you release the brakes and you get air back out to the relay valve.
If you release the brakes and you're getting air back out of the relay valve or out of your ABS valve, probably it's the diaphragm in your spring brake. Okay, most of the time.
Like,
There is, but it doesn't matter. You can't take that part of it apart anyway.
I know that air will come back through there.
Yeah, it comes back into the service side. That's why it leaks out there. Also, when you push it in, it leaks back out of this valve. Same thing. Your park brake chamber is probably bad. Couple of different options you can do there. You can replace the whole thing, or they make what's called a piggyback, which is simply from here back. It's just a spring brake in the aluminum housing that it's mounted in, and you can leave this bolted on. The nice part of that is this rod then stays the length it's supposed to be. I should have brought a aftermarket chamber with me. The rod on those things is about that long, and then you have to cut it off where it's at the right length, and that can be pretty tricky sometimes. Probably in the last 5 to 7 years, they now make what's called a welded clevis on these, so you can't replace, you just have to replace the chamber. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned a couple things in the toolkit to kind of keep with you. Would you recommend any lines of hose, or the link's going to be really at the connectors?
It's, that's just kind of a tough one to make a call on. If you're visually inspecting things on a regular basis, you're going to see if you have a spot rubbing, and that's why I say get under there, put your hands on stuff, and really look. I don't know that I've ever actually seen, this is called Synflex line. I don't know that I've actually ever seen one of them burst. I have seen a lot of holes rubbed in them, just from rubbing on stuff. Typically there's enough line that if you have a connector, you can just cut that out and slam a connector together. There's so many sizes though, I wouldn't know how to tell you what connectors to keep with you. I will say one other thing. You have to be really careful when you get these connectors for air. There are DOT approved connectors, and there's the stuff you put in your house. Okay. And it is not the same. Okay? And one really easy way to tell, see if I can get this thing apart one more time here, is if you look down in the middle of this actually has a little stem sticking in the middle that goes in the inside of the hose. And the reason that is there is when you shove this on, it won't crush the hose. Okay. Okay? So if it doesn't have that sleeve in there, it is not a DOT approved connection. As well as the hose. If you look at all this hose, you can see all the writing on the hoses. It will actually have a DOT number if it is approved for using in air systems. And that is pretty important.
So, does it have the size, the diameter of the hose written on there?
It does in most cases. I'm going to say that, and this is a 1/2 inch. Okay. So it should have.
So I can find my lines, I'll know what size connector
Yep.
should be.
Absolutely.
Different pressure gauges, whatever, for the different hoses.
Do what now?
The hoses aren't gauged by how much pressure
Nope.
they're rated to or whatever.
No, they're all rated to well beyond
So
what
if
you're
you
going to
want
use.
a 1/2 inch or 5/8, whatever.
Yeah, it's all because it all runs the same pressure. Yes, sir.
Your primary hose is always red? Is that what it?
From the factory, your primary hoses are always red. Your secondary is always green. If anybody's had their hands on it, they're all black. Because nobody keeps this colored crap in stock. I'm just going to tell you, they're just black. The other thing I want to really caution you on, I hadn't really thought about this, and probably never mentioned it in here before. If you have to make a splice or put a connection in, it's fine if you put a straight splice in. Oh crap, all I have is a 90-degree splice in my toolbox, right? You're gonna have one brake comes on a little bit faster than the other brake. And that's a bad thing. Okay? Getting back to brakes real quick. I mentioned that if you have a cracked shoe or a problem with a shoe, to replace that brake. Replace the brakes on both sides of that axle. Okay? Never replace one wheel at a time. All right, here's why. You go to a mom and pop bakery somewhere and they bake you a cake, right? It's mostly the same ingredients that the store-bought cake mix has, but maybe they add a few extra things to make it taste a little better, right? A little more expensive maybe than the box brand. But if you're baking two cakes, you're not going to get one from the baker and do a store-bought, right? Because they're not going to be the same. Well, brake shoes are the same. You know, there's a federal regulation of what they have to have. But there are a lot of companies that make them a little bit better because they just want them to last better. They want you to be happier. And Bendix may make theirs with this formula, and Meritor may make theirs with this formula, and they're not the same. One's a little softer, one's has a little more something else, but they're not going to act the same, right? So you're not going to have even braking on both sides if you don't replace across the axle, right? Now, I'm not saying that if you have to do the front axle, you got to do all of them, but at least across the axle, keep the same brand of shoe, right? The other thing is there's nothing worse than having this brake wear out, and a month later having to change this brake, and then 2 weeks later having to change this brake. Just change the brakes. They're not very expensive. I just bought a set of brakes for a semi the other day. They were like $48 for a set. Shit, they're cheaper than the ones on my pickup. Right? The other thing is, when it comes to brakes, anybody ever had a wheel seal fail? Brakes get all nasty, don't they? Change them. Do not let them talk you into, oh, we'll just clean them up. Because that's impossible. That oil soaks down in, you know, that's porous. And the oil gets down inside of that brake shoe and you can't get it out. I had a guy one time tell me, just take a torch and heat it up to boil the oil out. Yeah, the other thing, the glue will all come loose and the brake shoe will flake apart. Change them, right? And if you have to change that one, you got to do the one on the other side. And I know that sucks, but we want you guys to be safe going up and down the road, right? That's the biggest part of this whole air system. We want you guys being safe. And that's what it takes. It's a little more expensive. That's what it takes. Yes, sir?
If you're changing a wheel seal on one side, is it good to have it just change one on the other side too?
Nah. You don't know, I mean, there's so many things that can cause the wheel seal to go out. Typically it's misadjustment at some point or another that causes the thing to move around, or somebody didn't get a lock ring in right, or it's usually human error that causes the wheel seal to go out. The other thing that will cause them to go out is if your vent plugs up. Right? Your axles have a vent on them. If that vent gets plugged, you know, as oil heats up, it expands. And we have to be able to vent that air out of there. If we don't vent the air out, it's going to find a way out. And the wheel seal's the weak link. Yes, sir?
So going back to the fittings, and where I live now, it's getting real hard to find the actual compression air brake fittings.
Yep.
And most of the parts stores now don't have anybody in there that has any idea the difference between a compression fitting and an air brake compression fitting.
You are correct. I don't go to auto parts stores to buy parts for these things.
They have no
Go to a dealer. Now, there are aftermarket dealers. Inland Truck Parts is the one that's popular around here. There are aftermarket truck parts places. Don't go to O'Reilly's or AutoZone to buy stuff for your semi. I'm sorry, you're just not going to get the quality that you need. And I'm not knocking them at all. In case one of you guys owns one of those stores, don't get in trouble. I'm not knocking those at all. I'm just saying if you want good quality parts, right? It's the old line we've heard forever. You get what you pay for, right? So if you're going to go buy cheap, you're going to get cheap. Again, the airline has to have a DOT. You can go to AutoZone and buy all kinds of this plastic airline, but there's not going to be a DOT number on it anywhere. So does it really matter? Well, probably not. But what if you're in an accident? Right? What if you're in an accident and they deem that it was a failure in your brake system and you put a non-DOT brake hose on it? Right? You're going to be in a world of hurt.
Just played the lawyer's job.
Yeah. The lawyer ain't winning that one. I'm just going to tell you. So, you want to take a little break, Steve, before we do the question and answer portion, or do you want to just keep going? I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
It's up to these folks here.
So I'll open this up to anything. I mean, you got a question about anything. Yes, sir.
Using air to fill up your tires. On my system, they've taken the glad hands off and I've got the QD connector.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's on the...
It's on the red hose.
Right.
Yep.
So the way my setup is, they put a collar underneath the button to keep it in the out position.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know why. I'm just saying that's what's there.
Right.
So will the air work with
No, if you can't push that button in, you're not getting any air back here.
That's what I thought I understood from earlier. Okay.
Yep.
So I would have to take that collar off to be able to
push that in. So probably they have done that so you don't accidentally push that in. Now, if you have nothing hooked up on the back, it shouldn't stay in. Right? So if I were to, I drained all the air out now, but if I were to push that in and not have that hose blocked off, it'll just pop back out. Well, I don't know why they would have put a collar on.
Well, we do want to thank you for viewing our channel and hope that you like this presentation on the air brake systems. And I will list the Heavy Duty Truck Rally information below, the website and the Facebook information for your consideration. And just want to say thank you again to everyone who is viewing our channel, and if you have subscribed, and if you have not subscribed, please do so, like and subscribe, so you won't miss Ricky and I as we are soaring together and living life in different places.